everybody, it's Angel from Halo Inspirations. We give you inspirations to help you spread beauty and joy through your quilting journey. Happy hump day. Whoop whoop. Happy Wednesday to each and every one of you. It's Wednesday. I love me some Wednesdays. Love the hump day. So what are we doing today? Today is the second video to our sewing machine mat. So we are utilizing the sewing machine mat to get back to the basics, going back to the basics here. We did those videos 4 years ago. I said last month that it was 3, but it's 4 years ago we did these videos, and I'm going to leave them up because there's some nice chunks of information in there. Of course, it's always fun to see the evolution of anybody, whether it's doing videos or in their sewing journey or their quilting journey. You will definitely see a transition with me in my methods and the different things that I've done. So I'm just going to leave them all there. Okay. And in this I'm going to put up there, I will put a link for the playlist of that, but I'll also, in case you missed last month, inside those links are also prepping your fabric. That's where we started last week. And I talked about the things you need for this project. I talk about how to prep your fabric. So let's talk about this for just a second because we're moving on now, right? Check it out. Love for you to check that out and give us some comments and feedback on that. However, I've always said there are 4 parts to successful piecing. The first one is prepping, which we talked about last month, okay? Prepping your fabric, that's the first thing. The second thing that's important is cutting your fabric. That's what we're going to do today. We're going to cut some fabric, guys. The third part is sewing, which comes in 2 folds. It actually is sewing a straight line and your quote-unquote quarter-inch seam. We're going to talk about that next time. And then the final 4th item to successful piecing is pressing. How we press our blocks. How we press that fabric when we are sewing things together. So those are the 4 parts. So we did the prepping. Check it on out. And we've also, to this month, we're going to be talking about cutting your fabric. And I will tell you the first part of that is getting any yardage square. Okay, so we're going to go through all of that together and we're going to cut some fabric together. Okay, so sewing machine mat. I will put a picture up here. It is digital because I'm making it with you as we go. And I am publishing on a blog the different parts. Okay, so last time was prepping, but in prepping, I gave you what you need for the whole entire project. Okay, so I talk about the needs of fabric. So on the blog, you will see the fabric requirements and the digital picture that I've just shared with you. And then after this video, I will put on that blog the cutting instructions. By the end of the whole kit caboodle, we will have a completed pattern, and I will put it up for you to be able to download that as a PDF for a period of time for free. So we'll talk more about that at the end. But we are going to square and cut our fabric today. We are. Gotta love it. I will tell you, cutting is not my favorite, but it's a necessary and it's really important to understand it. Now, I am actually going to be cutting the fabric that I'm using for our project. Okay. But I want to say, if you've never cut fabric, I would highly encourage you to get a really inexpensive fat quarter. Don't use the good stuff. Really inexpensive fat quarter, and do these methods and get yourself an understanding on exactly how to use the tools. Wrap your head around how to get it all done so that when you go to cut your fabric for your project, you are going to be the expert. Okay? So I want to talk a little bit before I jump in, not too long here, but I want to talk about some of the things that I do use. I love the Olfa. I had to think about it. The Olfa cutting mat. Okay. I super love Olfa's cutting mat, but I have been playing with Creative Grids cutting mats, and I'm really liking those too. I've had some other people's mats in the past, and I can tell there is a difference. And there's no wrong, right to this either. you will find who your favorite is, and you'll see yourself buying it over and over when you have to replace it, because no lie to you guys, eventually they go bad. Okay, there are ways to take care of it, and we'll drop videos in the future on that. But the Olfa cutting mat is my favorite, but the bottom line is you need a cutting mat. Why? Because we're going to be using a rotary cutter. Okay, this is a gem. This is my best friend. You can't live without it. You kind of need it, okay? And because there is a blade on it, if you were to do this on your regular table, you're going to cut right into the table. And that would not be good, especially if it's a really fancy dining table, okay? So you'll need a cutting mat to be able to use this. I will also tell you, if you were to cut on a table, because you say, well, I don't care about the table, it will dull the blade a lot faster. And if you know a quilter and you've ever talked to them, or if you're a quilter and you know, we're changing these things quite frequently, okay? And they're not exactly cheap. So the blades. So you really do want to take care of the blade by using a really good cutting mat, a self-healing cutting mat. That's very important. Okay. Helps protect the blade and help it last a little longer. The other thing I want to tell you, if you could only buy one ruler, I always encourage the Big Easy. That's what Creative Grid calls it. This is a Creative Grid ruler. It is 12.5 by 24.5. What does that mean? 12.5 wide, 12.5 inches by 24.5 inches long. Now, why do I like this ruler so much? Number one, it's 12.5 inches. Okay, so we can get a lot in there. Number two, being 24.5 inches long, most fabric, when you fold it, we'll just go with the number, it's at least 44 inch, at most 44 inches. I think that's the longest standard on a bolt, besides a wide back. We're not going there. Fabric there is, and I fold mine one time. So if you fold it in half, if it started at 44, I'm trying to do the math real fast, that will mean that it's 22 inches long. Well, this being 24.5 will go all the way across the entire fabric. Okay, it still has all the markings for the angles if you need them. I'm going to show something here up close and personal, but it does have halves, holes, eighths. It's got everything you need. And if you're cutting a 2.5 inch square, it's big, but you can still cut a 2.5 inch square. If you're cutting a 4.5 inch square, you could do that. If you're cutting an 8.5 inch square, you could do that. This is, to me, if you could afford one ruler, this is the one I suggest. So in the video, I will be using the Big Easy. I use a 2 ruler method to square my fabric. So I also have a 6.5 by 24.5. Could you get by with this? Absolutely. This used to be my one, if you were going to buy one ruler, this was it. So I have one. And this is the 2 ruler method. Now, if you only had the Big Easy, but maybe you had a 24.5 inch ruler, you could do the 2 ruler method to square your fabric with that. It really doesn't matter too much. You just need 2 rulers. Now, at the end, after cutting everything that I will show you how to cut, I am going to demonstrate how to do a 1 ruler method. Okay. And there'll be a couple of things. If you have one that goes across the fabric, one fold, great. If you have a 12.5 inch ruler, 12.5 inch square, I show you how you could do that also. Okay. But I use a 2 ruler method, and I talk about why later. So we have rulers. We have rotary cutters. We have cutting mats. Those are the things that you're going to need to cut the fabric. Well, of course, you'll need the fabric too. Okay. Just saying. So after we talked about all that, we want to go ahead and get started. Let's have some fun. Let's go ahead and square our fabric. We're going to do a wiggle wiggle dance. So let's go ahead and get that fabric squared, and then get our fabric cut. So I will see you guys in just a sec. Back at ya. Don't kill me. Woo! But I realize I forgot to tell you something, because some of you are very, very new. And even if you have taken a class, you might come across something later that you'll need to understand your ruler for. So I just kind of wanted to do a little quick rundown on how to read your ruler. Okay, so I'm going to switch over to the camera here. I got a nice glare going. Okay, so what you have here, this is a 6.5 inch ruler. How do I know that? We've got, there we go. It starts over here, well, at 0, okay, and it goes all the way across to 6 and then we've got 1/2 inch. So what I wanted to do is talk to you about, actually I'm going to put a piece of paper under it. I think that'll work a lot better. Okay, so what I want to do is just go through just a few things, okay, because I do notice that even with people who've maybe they've only made one quilt and they're going to make another quilt and they're not really sure what they're looking at when they're seeing a ruler. Creative Grids, if you'll notice here, actually has a dotted line down here, a straight dotted line, okay? And they have one going on this side. Those are the only two sides that they have them on. But what that is your 1/4 inch line. And it actually even tells you that right there, 1/4 inch, okay? This is another best friend of yours, okay? Knowing where your 1/4 inch is. So I wanted to give you an idea of what that dotted line is. I use it when I cut, okay? You'll see that in the future here. And then if you'll see here, okay, this is the 1, okay? Well, we'll start from the beginning. So we have 0, and just so you know, this little square right here on the corner, right there, that is your 1/4 inch square. Sometimes you use that, believe it or not, okay? They even have an 1/8 square. So we've got a 1/4 inch, then we have a small tick and a large tick. The large tick is your 1/2 mark, okay? Small tick, large, in between the largest and the smallest. We got another tick here, just a little bigger than the one before. This is a 3/4. Then you have your 1, and it starts over 1 1/4, 1 1/2, 1 3/4, 2. Okay, and it goes all the way across. The really cool thing, and I talk about this in the video, is your 1/2 marks. So this is 2 1/2. Okay, I know that because this is 2 1/4, 2 1/2. Okay, 2 3/4, and 3. So your 2 1/2 has a nice long white lines to show you that 2 1/2. Okay. It also, if you wanted to cut a 2 1/2 inch square, it has like a little square part here that you can utilize. Okay. Now we're going to start back over because now we've talked about 1 inch, 1 1/4, 1 1/2, 1 3/4, and 2. But sometimes, guys, believe it or not, sometimes you will have a 2 7/8. What? Okay. So when you're reading your ruler, with this particular ruler, not every ruler has this, but Creative Grids does. So each one of these ticks on the bottom is an 1/8. Okay. So this was 1 inch. 1 1/8, that's 1/8. That's 2/8, which happens to be a 1/4. That's 3/8, because we've counted 1, 2, 3. That's 4/8, which is a 1/2. The next one would be 5/8, 6/8, which is 3/4. That's your 7/8, and then you'd have your whole number again. So if you needed a 2 7/8, you'd start with the 2 and you'd go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So that little hash mark right there is your 7/8. Okay. So I wanted just to go over really quick on how to read that ruler. And while you're starting, I would always utilize these whole numbers with the halves in between them, because I will tell you Creative Grids does have 1/2 marks instead of holes. But that's a whole nother thing that you got to retrain your brain. Okay. So when you're first starting out, these whole numbers down here at the bottom will definitely be your friend. Okay. And these little ticks are an 8s, and you can count to see where you need to be. And then they do them all the way up the ruler. You can see they're all the way up. Oh, you couldn't see all that, but this is right here. That's 7/8 also. See, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So you can really get a good straight line with your fabric, just utilizing those marks. Okay. All right. So for real, I promise, we're going to go cut fabric. I'll see you in just a sec. So here we are right here in the pig pen where we're going to square our fabric. Okay. Now I use a 2 ruler method currently. So I'm going to walk you through part of this process with a 2 ruler method, but I will do a 1 ruler method afterwards. Okay. I want to give you an update because I know that not many people have 2 rulers and it can be a little challenging and different. So I have some tips on what you can do with that. So squaring your fabric is a 2-part process. Okay. So we're going to start with the first. And as you can see, I do have my fabric here. Now what I'm going to do, this is on the selvage end. And if you're new to quilting, what is selvage? Well, it's that end that may have the dots in it. It might be white in color. It might have the name of the fabric, the designer, the year it was printed. The first year it was printed, because they may print it over and over, but it'll still show that first year. It is the way that it is loaded onto a bolt, plain and simple. Okay, but it is definitely obvious. It's much tighter woven, and it's got one end or both ends will have punched holes, like I said. So we're going to take our fabric, which is called width of fabric, but it's folding it selvage to selvage. Okay. All right, now I'm going to try and demonstrate this so that you can see it. So when we load fabric on a bolt, or not we don't do it. When the manufacturer gets their fabric loaded onto bolts, it is stretched, it is pulled, it is folded, it is done all kinds of craziness. So it may not be straight of grain on the bolt. Well, I will say I've never seen it straight on the grain, okay? Never seen it straight. It's been tugged and pulled. So you got to square your fabric first. So we're going to take it, putting selvage to selvage, and I have my fingers inside. I've got my pointy finger on the inside, I've got my middle finger on the outside, and my thumb on the other outside. And I'll do the same thing with this side of my fabric, okay? And you're going to make it go back and forth, okay? You're sliding it back and forth, and I'm about to drop it. Okay. Now what you want to pay attention to, I'm going to make it wrong first, okay? So if you can see at the bottom, at the very bottom, there is a wrinkle per se, and I'll put a line if I can figure out how on our system, just to show you where it is. So what you want to do is you want to slide it back and forth, left and right, until the bottom is straight, okay? Once you think it is straight, I can see it back here, but I couldn't see it in the front. Yep. Then you're just going to simply take it and lay it down as such. Well, now I've moved it. Okay. Lay it down right on your cutting mat. Okay. Oh, it's not straight. Hold on. Takes a minute. There we go. Now don't press it. If you press it at this point, you're going to have a nice crease and it might not be actually straight, okay? So all you're going to do then is simply hand press it, okay? Now, that's the first part. I am going to bring you in a little bit because I want you to see that this fabric isn't straight, okay? And how I can tell. Well, it looks like it's not straight, but we're going to cut the straight edge off the wonky sides, okay, with a 2 ruler method. So I'm going to bring you in, give you a little bit of a overhead shot so that you can see this. After that wiggle, place it down, give you a nice straight line, and I'll see you for the second part in just a sec. So I have gone ahead and laid my Big Easy. This is my go-to ruler. I love this ruler. I've laid it on top. Now I took a picture because I wanted you to be able to see. I am taking the 1/4 inch line because it's dotted, and I have it going straight across that fold right there at the bottom, okay? Now you'll notice the numbers are backwards. That's not a camera thing. I actually have the ruler flipped because it doesn't really matter what the numbers are at this point. We're trying to give ourselves this side to be a straight line, okay? We know down here, based off of the wiggle wiggle, that this is actually a straight line. Now, when you look at this, if for some reason your line was not lining up correctly and your fabric was doing something really odd, you would know that you need to do the wiggle wiggle again, okay? Because it should look just like the picture. Now, I don't know how much you'll be able to see. I'm going to zoom in if I have to. But underneath, this underneath fabric, okay, is actually shorter than what's on the top. And it actually goes, you can see that this piece on the top gets a little bigger as we go. And underneath, it is definitely smaller, okay? Because the fabric wasn't cut straight on grain when we cut it from the bolt, okay? So now we need, this is a straight line and this is a straight line. So you want to make sure everything lines up nicely. You don't want to cut a lot of fabric off, so you want to try and get as close as you can so that you don't waste fabric doing this, okay? So I'm simply just going to take my second ruler, which is a 6.5 by 24.5, and I'm just going to butt it up right next to it, okay? I'm then simply going to very carefully move the ruler out of the way. Now, in order to help myself, I use a dumbbell. It is my grace. My ruler tends to slip and slide. This keeps it in place. So I know everything is straight. Now notice I used the big ruler first, and that's because I could see what was going on for 12.5 inches. I knew this line looked really, really pretty. So if I use a 6.5, I only get 6.5 inches and not the same amount, right? So I can really see what's going on with this fabric at this, what are we calling a true line. So now I've got my ruler in place where it needs to be cut, and I'm simply going to just cut the fabric. Now before you move the ruler, you want to make sure you went through all the layers. See, I didn't go all through the layers at that point. There we go. Now I know that I've went through all the layers. The fabric is cut straight. So then I'm just going to simply move the second ruler out of the way, and this is my scrap. But guess what, guys? We now have one true straight line that is true to this line. So we've got a perfect 90-degree angle. Well, as perfect as can be, right? So that is how we square our fabric. Now I'm not going to move this fabric. See, the two ruler method allows me not to have to move the fabric. The more you move it, the better the chance is that you are going to actually shift it in just a way that it'll be a little bit off. So using that two ruler method allows you to keep the fabric where it is. And now we're going to go to cutting our fabric. So I'll see you in just a sec. Now that we have our fabric square, I wanted to stop for a second and read the pattern with you to understand what we're going to cut from yardage and from those pre-cuts. And in the next clip, we will cut the strips from yardage, and then we'll also work with some pre-cut fabric so that you can understand what exactly I do to get nice, almost perfect squares. I never say perfect because nobody's perfect, but really close to being perfect squares that we so need. So let me bring you in over here. This is our pattern. Now what I will do is I will put this on a blog until everything is said and done and we finished our project, and then I'll put it into a PDF format that you can actually download if you so choose. So for those of you who are new to reading patterns, every one of them is a little different. Everybody has their own techniques. However, we're talking about cutting, okay? Now, I'm going to change the words a little bit, I think, but yardage, any type of yardage, I am telling you here, the measurements are based on 42-inch usage. What does that mean? What does that mean? So we have fabric, it has the selvage on two ends, and if you cut that off, I'm telling you that you have 42 inches that you can use. A lot of patterns do 40. I've started to see a lot more 42 in our industry, so I've switched over to 42 inches, okay? That's all that means, is that the fabric that you can use is you've got a 42 inches worth that you can utilize inside your quilt, okay, after the selvage is cut. So if you'll notice here, it says for background, what kind of strips are we going to do? Now this is off of yardage, okay? We need two 4.5-inch strips. WOF is width of fabric. That means selvage to selvage. So we are going to cut together two 4.5-inch strips. And out of those 4.5-inch strips, each strip we will end up getting, when we're done cutting, we'll take a strip, we'll cut 4.5-inch squares from that, okay? And it'll take two strips to do it. So we'll cut 12 4.5-inch squares out of our background. Then if you'll notice, I have colored squares, okay? Those are the not backgrounds. And you will notice that it says cut a total of 48 2.5-inch squares. So we're going to manipulate some pre-cuts, and we're going to cut 2.5-inch squares out of those. Now I'm not going to have you watch me do 48 of them, but you'll get a good idea of how to cut your fabric. I do also list in the cutting instructions, if you're ready to figure out what your binding is. Remember back last month, I told you needed a 1/4 yard, okay? So out of that 1/4 yard, once it's squared, you will need to cut, depending on what you use, you could use 2 1/4 or 2 1/2, but you'll need, either way, you will need 3 strips with a fabric, selvage to selvage, okay? So that is the cutting instructions for this pattern, and I just wanted to go over that because I know a lot of people struggle, and of course, like I said, everybody has their own method to writing them, so I thought it'd be a good chance to sit down and just show you what is written. Again, this will be on the blog so that you have full access to this and you don't have to take a screenshot. So I'm going to see you guys in just a sec at the cutting board, because now we're going to take our background fabric that we just squared, and we're going to go ahead and cut 2 4.5-inch strips with a fabric. So I'll see you in just a sec. So here we are, back at you. We have our 2 straight edges. Now we're going to cut strips, and as you see, we need to cut 2 strips at 4.5. Now we could line up down at the bottom with our 1/4 inch and along the edge with our 1/4 inch, which I threw a picture up to be sure that you could actually see what I'm talking about. What's so important is that your line that you're using for your 4.5 is on the fabric and not next to the fabric and not too far in on the fabric. You want the line of the fabric to be lined up with the line of the 4.5, okay? That's so important. If you're just slightly off onto the mat and next to the fabric, you're not really cutting 4.5. You're cutting less than 4.5, okay? And remember, cutting is so important, okay? Easy breezy. The line of the ruler is on the fabric, okay? Now, we could line up 4.5, cut, line up 4.5, cut, line up 4.5, cut. However, eventually your fabric gets out of square and you'll have to do the 2 ruler method or the single rule method, whatever method you use to square your fabric, you'll have to re-square it. It's about anywhere between 3 and 5 cuts, and I don't understand why it happens. I can just tell you that it does. I'm guessing because fabric shifts, okay? However, in order to cut less times on your main fabric that you have squared, I do multiples. So we need 2 strips, right? So I'm going to cut 4.5 plus 4.5 is, dun dun dun, 9. Okay, so I'm going to go to 9 inches. Now the thing about the Creative Grid ruler is they are, I'll be real frank and honest with you, they are, they're solid. Okay, so it's a little trickier to make sure that you're on the fabric, but that's the trick. So I just pull it in just a little just to see where it's at, and then I can get right on it. Get right on it, right on the edge. And I'm still straight down here, okay? And now I'm on the fabric, but I'm on the 9. Again, I like to use my dumbbell. Gives me a little support. And I'm going to go ahead and cut a 9-inch strip. Okay, now if I were going to cut more, I just wouldn't touch this. I'm going to move it just a little before I move the ruler, making sure that I have a nice clean cut, and I do. So after I've cut the main bulk here, I could cut more still. It very well can be done. I don't need to square it because I only made one cut, unless I cut funny. But we don't need to worry about that. We're doing 2 strips of 4.5. So I'm going to slide this over, and I'm going to go to 4.5. And what do I say? Like y'all are going to hear this a million times. The line of the fabric, I'm sorry, the line on the ruler is on the fabric. Okay, lining the ruler 4.5 with the line of the fabric, where the line is on the fabric. Okay, so once I have 4.5, I'm going to go ahead and lay down my trusty old dumbbell, and I make sure I'm still straight everywhere, because measure twice, cut once, and I'm going to go ahead and cut a 4.5-inch strip. Okay, making sure I've gone all the way through, and I have. Okay, so now what I have are the 2 4.5-inch strips that I needed. Okay, now I'm just gonna, we don't need to use this anymore for this project, so I'm just gonna simply move it out of the way. And with those 2 strips of 4.5, we needed 12 4.5-inch squares. So I'm going to open this up, and the first thing I'm going to do is get rid of this selvage. Okay, and again, I use a line on the bottom, making sure I'm nice and straight. It's the 1/4-inch line. It just makes things so much easier. If I really wanted to get crazy with it, I can actually look up here too on a dotted line to make sure that it's all straight. But once I like where it's at, I'm just getting rid of selvage first, and I'll just cut that off. Okay, we're simply going to flip it around. Okay, and now I'm going to go to the 4.5-inch line. Now what's really nice about the Creative Grid is it goes on a dotted line for me because it's not a whole number, but there's a little square area. Okay, and I'm just going to simply line up the 4.5. I'm going to line up on the top, I'm going to line up on the bottom, and I could simply cut. Now, if you really like that dotted 1/4-inch line, you would line up on the 4.5. You would line up on the edge. Now it's going to be up here at 5 3/4 because we're adding 4 3/4 because we're adding the 1/4-inch at the bottom. But you can see there's my 4.5. There's another 1/4-inch above it, and you'll just simply give it a cut. And you're going to do that 12 times, and I believe that you will get 9 squares out of a strip. I kind of like this one better. Making sure everything's straight. Okay. That's 3. We'll just keep going. I'll get one strip done. Probably speed up the video for you. Okay, let's count them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So out of this strip, I will need to cut 3 more, and I'll do that off camera. And then we will have our 12 4.5-inch squares. That's all your backgrounds, okay? So now we're going to cut the 2.5-inch squares. Now, if you're messing with a 10-inch square pack like I am, I mean, this is a lot of extra fabric. 2.5-inch squares, that's a lot, okay? I mean, it's not very much for the 10-inch. You're going to have lots left over, okay? And like I said, I'm using this from a scrap pile. I mean, it was another project that I used, so I have different sizes. Oh, and even on this one, I have a little bit of stabilizer. I'll have to cut that off. But bottom line is I've got plenty of choices to utilize, but I'm going to show you as if I was just going to cut one 2.5-inch square from here, okay? So the thing about 10-inch squares is that they have these, what are these called? Pinked edges. So I personally like to get rid of one of them. I don't want to waste a lot of fabric, but I definitely want to give myself a straight line. So what I do here is a lot of times they're kind of cattywampus anyway. Like you'll put it down and it doesn't really measure. These are supposed to be 10 inches. So if we did that, well, see, and this one's short on one side. Oh, is it? Yes. So this is my 10-inch mark. This is actually not really 10 inches. You can see that. But I'm going to do a straight line. So I'm making this line down here as straight as possible. And I have those pinked edges. So what I'm doing is I'm lining up that ruler so that all the peaks to the pinked edge is going to be lined up with the bottom of my fabric. And then I'm just going to simply give it a cut. Now I have a straight edge, and this is all I'm going to waste. But I am going to turn it. And I need another straight edge. So I'm going to line up. Matter of fact, sometimes it's easier if you flip your fabric to the wrong side because it'll give it more contrast against the cutting mat. So I'm going to line this up. Only thing I'm paying attention to is the very bottom. And I'm trying to get skinny over here because I don't want to waste a lot of fabric. Okay. Whoop, I moved that. You saw that. I saw that. Okay, so I'm going to give myself a nice straight edge. Now I have 2 straight edges. Don't know how I want to do this. Okay, so now I'm going to cut a 2.5-inch strip because that way I have lots left over from my, I'm only going to use 1 or 2 squares out of this. I'm only going to cut 1 to start with, because I think I want every single square to be different. That's my choice. You can do them all the same. You could do 2 different ones. You could do whatever you want. However, I'm going to line up down at the bottom that dotted 1/4-inch line, and then my 2.5-inch line is straight along the fabric on the fabric. It's the same process over and over. So I'm simply going to cut, make sure I'm at 2.5-inch strip. Okay, from there, now notice I did use a 12.5-inch ruler because I wanted the ruler to be bigger than the fabric. It makes it a heck of a lot easier. But now I'm going back to the 6.5-inch ruler. You could use a 12.5, you could use the Big Easy, you could use whatever ruler as long as you can measure a 2.5-inch square. Now again, I'm on the fabric, and Creative Grids, pull that out a little bit, they have like a little corner right here that tells me that's the corner of the 2.5. So I'm putting it right inside of the corner, making sure three sides are lined up. I have the quarter, my line is on the fabric, and I'm just going to simply cut. Okay, boom, just like that I have a 2.5-inch square. Now we'll need 48 of this. Now I'm not going to sit with you and cut 48, it would drive you crazy. But I did want to go over one more thing. If you use a 5-inch square pack, you need 48. First thing I would do is I would go through and figure out which colors I want to use in the pack, because sometimes you'll have colors in there that you don't want in your project. Okay, now if you were to cut one square from every 5-inch square, normally there are about 42 squares in a pack, so you'd still need 6 more. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to give myself a straight edge, and I'm going as skinny as I can. Okay, there we go. I'm going to flip it over, and I'm going to cut a 2.5-inch strip. Now doing this, if this square was actually 5 inches, this will not be 2.5, but we're going to measure it just for sakes. Okay, that's 2.5, that I know. So we'll measure this, put it on the 2.5-inch line, and the pinked edges take it right to it. So I could get away with using this again with 2.5s, but we're gonna let that go. We want 2 2.5-inch squares. At least we're gonna let it go for now. Let me measure this out. Okay, with the pinked edges lined up along this edge, I don't know if you can see it. I'll see if I can zoom in. The pinked edges come just, the peaks come just outside of the 5-inch line. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this to the 2.5 where the peaks are all lining up on the 2.5. You could do it this way. Okay, and then I would cut, and I should have 2 2.5-inch. Or we're going to go a step further. Let's see how big this sucker is. Oh, it doesn't matter. Either way, we're going to have to contend with it. So we're going to go ahead and cut these. I was hoping I could show you something else, but not going to work. So I'm going to go ahead and put it to the peaks are lining up with the 2.5. Okay, and when we go to sew some of these together, I'll see if I can, I'm going to help with stitching this, okay, so that you get to see when we're going to sew these things how I deal with these pinked edges. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and cut 2.5-inch square. Now this should measure at least 2.5, and it does. So here's the situation though. I got some that sticks out just like we saw before, so I'm just going to clean it up a little. And it's not very much. I don't know if you can see that, but it was enough. I know this is 2.5, and I know the other one's 2.5. Okay, now I'm not using 5-inch squares, but just in case you do, I wanted to show you how I would cut them. So on one side you will still have pinked edges. Okay, you only need to do that if you use one 2.5-inch square. You only need to do that for 6 of them. You'll have to use double. Okay, if you're using a 10-inch square pack, you have plenty to utilize whatever colors you like. Okay, now of course there's 42 in there, so there will be duplicates also, but I think you get a lot better picture on how I would keep cutting 2.5, 2.5, and then whatever had the pinked edge, I'd leave it off. I wouldn't use that square. So that's how I cut the 10-inch squares, the 5-inch squares. That's how I cut my yardage to get the 2 4.5-inch strips. You'll need 12 of those, 48 of these, and then we will go to the next step next time that we talk. But before I go with you and come back at you face to face, I do want to show you the one ruler method to square and cut your fabric. So I'll see you in just a sec. Back at you here. We are going to do the one ruler method, and you'll see some differences. So this is a blue fabric. My cutting mat is blue, so I'm actually going to fold it so that the wrong side is on the outside, because that contrast will give me enough to see clearly on what I'm doing. So again, same process. You're going to take it, you're going to do the wiggle wiggle, okay? And when you think it's straight, you're going to place it right down on top. Now I am right-handed, so the method I'm showing you is on the right-handed side. So it would just be opposite if you were left-handed, okay? So I'm very simply going to take my ruler, and again, just like before, there's not a whole lot of difference, but this time I'm lining it up on the right side because I need to cut with my right hand, and I'm not using two rulers. Now I am looking because I don't want to cut too much. Man, this is really cattywampus. And again, I'll take my trusty dumbbell, placing it right there for us. Take the rotary cutter and give it a cut. Now, I need to be able to measure 4.5, 2.5, whatever strips I need to cut. That's my waist. Okay. So what happens now, and this is why I don't use this method anymore. So I don't like to manipulate the fabric a whole bunch because shift happens, okay? So, but what you'll do is you'll very carefully pick it up and flip it over, making sure that everything's still lined up, okay? And then you'll place the same process when you go to cut. You want to make sure that you are straight on the bottom, that you are straight along the edge of the fabric with the line on the fabric, okay? And once you're ready to cut, you go ahead and cut your 2.5 inch strip. Now, let's say you don't have a ruler that stretches this far. Okay, I have another ruler, just making sure. Once you find that center and what you think, with the wiggle wiggle, that the fabric is straight, okay, this time you'll put the fold down towards you, give it a press, then you will fold it again, taking the fold to the selvage, and you'll do the wiggle wiggle again. Okay, nice and flat, hopefully folding it like this. I have a ruler big enough. I'm going to use a 12.5, and I would do the exact same thing. One ruler method, line it up along the fold at the bottom, and then I don't like to use this. I still don't. I've been doing this a long time, and I still don't double fold, because if I don't have it completely straight, we're not going to get a straight cut, okay? But I will do a straight cut for that, and then the same thing, you'll just take your fabric and you'll flip it and then resume cutting your strips. That's if in fact you don't have that ruler to manipulate. Now, you might be asking me, why in the world are you doing all of this anyway? Well, for those of you who have been cutting for a while, who've been quilting, have you ever cut a strip and it turned, it bent, or right where the fold is, it has a peak or an indentation? Okay, I'm going to try and do that on this fabric. Hopefully I have enough to play with. This is actually for binding. Okay, so I'm just going to cut it cattywampus, at least what I think is cattywampus. Oh, it definitely doesn't look pretty. Okay. And we'll come over here. Nope, I'm going to come over here and I'm going to cut a 2.5 inch strip. Okay. Gotta make sure. Whew, this is gonna be bad. Okay. I can tell by looking at it. That's not even 2.5. Let's go in. It's gonna be fat on one side. It's gonna be almost 3 inches because this thing is not straight. I should probably make it not straight first, huh? All right. All right. We're going to pull that open. So this one, I think you can see, maybe you can't. It's not equal. Oh, and it has a slight bend. Do y'all see? Well, okay, let me hold that straight. Do you see how it's curving? It's going like this, okay? And to be real with you, I don't know if you can see it, but this side is skinnier than this side. I'll hold it up again. Okay? So it does curve. That's what we're trying to prevent. When you square your fabric and make it square, it won't curve, or it shouldn't, or you want square. And if for whatever reason, cut one more strip. I'm hoping I can get it to be where you can see a peak or a valley. I don't get that much anymore. We're going to try it. Out. Let's see if it did it. Very slight. So I will take a picture. Oh, I think it's still bending. Can you see it bending the other direction now? It's going like this. Okay. And I will take a picture and I will show you and throw it up here how the center looks. It still looks pretty darn good, but not like there are times when you'll find it right at the fold that it won't be right. And the only thing that's not right about this is it curves. Okay. I'll grab the other strip. Let's take a look at the one we did square correctly. Okay. Truth be told here, that's nice and straight. Nice and straight. Okay. Not nice and straight. It bends. I don't know if you can see that, but it's bending right there in the middle to go so that the sides are lower. This is nice and straight, and I don't have any peaks or valleys at the fold, which is right below my nose area. So that's why we square before we cut, so that our strips are nice and straight. They don't bend, they don't have peaks and valleys at the fold. Everything is good to go. So I hope you enjoyed that, but I will see you guys in just a sec. So there you have it, how to square and cut that fabric, whether it's pre-cuts or yardage. I hope that was helpful for you. If you're following along, I hope that was completely explainable, but if you have any questions, do not hesitate to ask. That's why I am here for you, okay? I will tell you also today at 3 p.m. Eastern Time. Why? Because we're in Virginia. I will be here for our live Q&A, live quilting and answers for any questions that you may have. I might add something that I forgot. This time I'm not sure that I did. I say that and then we'll see what happens during the live. However, I'll be here today at 3 p.m. just for you. We'll do a little chit chat and we'll have a little fun and we'll talk about cutting and squaring your fabrics. Okay. So next time we come, we will be sewing. Remember, there are 4 parts. We've covered prepping. We've covered cutting. On the line, guys. I know you're going to hate hearing me say that a million times, but when you're cutting, you'll remember. So cutting your fabric. So next time is the 1/4 inch, or it's sewing a straight line and sewing the 1/4 inch seam. Okay. So that's what we're going to do next time. We're going to start to put all these pieces together. And I have some tips for you. And get this topper in the right place. And we'll also be talking about pressing also, because it's part of when you do your piecing. So we'll be actually covering 2 parts next time. So until 3 p.m., right? Because we have our live Q&A. And until next time, may you all continue to be inspired, productive, ever so joyful. Never stop believing, and never stop making your dreams in quilting come true. We love y'all. Happy quilting. Happy hump day. Whoop, whoop. And we'll see you all soon.